Welcome, everyone, to Trinidad's Roundtable 52, the Fitzgerald legacy and the hidden imperial jealousy behind the JFK assassination. For over 400 years, the Fitzgeralds stood as defenders of the Irish people against London's imperial conquest. The Irish genocide perpetuated by the British Crown was celebrated in the 1586 edition of Holindshed's Chronicles as one of the great and wonderful works of God, both his severe judgment against traitors, rebels, and disobedient, and of his mercy and loving kindness upon the obedient and dutiful. With the beheading of the last Earl in 1583, the imperial vision of John Dee and the Elizabethan court would expand outward into the Americas toward the fateful location of Dallas and the date of November 22nd, 1963. Why should we care today? It's game changing to realize that jealousy was the strongest force behind the assassination of JFK, and imperialism itself. Media pioneer Marshall McLuhan stated that fact in 1995. When he said, "The cultural aggression of white America against Negroes and Indians is not based on skin color and belief in radical superiority, whatever ideological clothing may be used to rationalize it, but on the white man's inchoate awareness that the Negro and the Indian are actually physically and socially superior under a retribal environment to the fragmented, alienated, and dissociated man of Western civilization, the detribal." We will examine the long-range imperial vision, the Fitzgerald legacy, and what these hidden patterns may reveal about transcending empire and moving toward a peaceful future. Joining us will be Franklin O'Canu, who is leaving at 4, author of Unorthodoxy, a newsletter that examines spirituality within our material reality. With a doctorate in pharmacology, he combines scientific training with esoteric inquiry to explore deeper frameworks of reality. He is the author of An Unorthodox Truth, a theoretical discussion about our world reality and where society is going. These roundtables were started by husband and wife co-authors Paul Fitzgerald and Elizabeth Gould, who have developed a plan for world peace at valediction.net. Just click on World Peace at the top banner to learn more about that plan. Today we will hear from Chris and Liz and Franklin, and then we want everyone to join in with thoughts and suggestions on peace and the world we want to build. But before that, I'd like to introduce our host, publisher, Chris Milligan.
Thank you, Adam, very, very much. And, we definitely live in interesting times, okay? And where what you believe sometimes makes you a target. Sometimes people call you names, whatever, okay? But, you have to explore everything. And what I tell people all the time is, don't be afraid to explore things, but be very careful on what you do base your beliefs on. Okay. And generally, I start these off with some of the words of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And I'm going to give a bit of a bridge from his address at Independence Hall, Philadelphia, July 4th, 1962. Now, this was 64 years ago. Okay. It is a high honor for any citizen of our great republic to speak at this Hall of Independence on this day of independence. To speak as the President of the United States to the chief executives of our 50 states is both an opportunity and an obligation. The necessity for comity between the national government and several states is an indelible lesson of our long history. Because our system is designed to encourage both differences and dissent, because its checks and balances are designed to preserve the rights of the individual and the locality against preeminent central authority. You and I, governors, recognize how dependent we both are, one upon the other, for the successful operation of our unique and happy form of government. Our system and our freedom permit the legislature to be pitted against the executive, the state against the federal government, the city against the countryside, party against party, interest against interest, all in the competition or in contention one with another. Our task, your task in the State House and my task in the White House is to weave from all of these tangled threads a fabric of law and progress. We are not permitted the luxury of irresolution. Others may confine themselves to debate, discussion, and the ultimate luxury, free advice. Our responsibility is one of decision, for to govern is to choose. Thus, in a very real sense, you and I are the executors of this testament handed down by those who gathered in this historic hall 186 years ago today, 250 now. For they gathered to affix their names to a document which was, above all else, a document not of rhetoric, but of bold decision. It is true, a document of protest. But protest had been made before. It set forth their grievances with eloquence. But such eloquence had been heard before. But what distinguished this paper from all others was the final irrevocable decision that it took to assert the independence of free states in place of colonies, and to commit to that goal their lives, their fortunes, their sacred honor. Today, 250 years later, the Declaration, whose yellowing parchment and fading, almost illegible lines I saw in the past week in the National Archives in Washington, is still a revolutionary document. To read it today is to hear a trumpet call. For that declaration unleashed not merely a revolution against the British, but a revolution in human affairs. Its authors were highly conscious of its worldwide implications, and George Washington declared that liberty and self-government everywhere were, in his words, finally staked on the experiment entrusted to the hands of the American people. This prophecy has been borne out. For 186/250 years, this doctrine of national independence has shaken the globe and remains the most powerful force anywhere in the world today. There are those struggling to eke out a bare existence in a barren land who have never heard of free enterprise, but who cherish the idea of independence. There are those who are grappling with overpowering problems of illiteracy and ill health, and who are ill-equipped to hold free elections. But they are determined to hold fast to their national independence. Even those unwilling or unable to take part in any struggle between East and West are strongly on the side of their own national independence. The theory of independence is as old as man himself, and it was not invented in this hall, but it was in this hall that the theory became practice, that the word went out to all in Thomas Jefferson's phrase that the God who gave us life gave us liberty at the same time. And today this nation, conceived in revolution, nurtured in liberty, maturing in independence, has no intention of abdicating its leadership in the worldwide movement for independence to any nation or society committed to the systemic human oppression. As apt and applicable as the Declaration of Independence is today, we would do well to honor the other historic document drafted in this hall, the Constitution of the United States. For it stressed not independence, but interdependence, not the individual liberty of one, but the indivisible liberty of all. In most of the old colonial world, the struggle for independence is coming to an end, even in areas behind the curtain. That which Jefferson called the disease of liberty still appears to be infectious. With the passing of ancient empires, today less than 2% of the world's population lives in territories officially termed dependent. As this effort for independence, inspired by the American Declaration of Independence, now approaches a successful close, a great new effort for interdependence is transforming the world about us. And the spirit of that new effort is the same spirit which gave birth to the American Constitution. It was 11 years from the Declaration of Independence to the writing of the Constitution. The construction of a workable federal institution required still another generation. The greatest works of our nation's founders lay not in documents and in declarations, but in creative, determined action. On Washington's birthday in 1861, standing right here, President-elect Abraham Lincoln spoke in this hall on his way to the nation's capital, and he paid a brief but eloquent tribute to the men who wrote, who fought for, and who died for the Declaration of Independence. Its essence, he said, was its promise, not only of liberty to the people of this country, but hope to the world. Hope that in due time the weights should be lifted from the shoulders of all men, and that all should have an equal chance. On this 4th day of July, 1962, we who are gathered at the same hall, entrusted with the fate and future of our states and nations, declare now our vow to do our part, to lift the weights from the shoulders of all, to join other men and nations in preserving both peace and freedom, and to regard any threats to the peace or freedom of one as threats to the peace and freedom of all. And for the support of this declaration, with firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor. Now, I have to reflect, after reading that, the state of our nation in 1962 and the state of our nation in 2026. If President Kennedy was assassinated, okay, that affected our country greatly. And here we are, excuse my language, in a mess. But I really appreciate, again, everybody with their time here. Now I'm going to introduce Alana Hartsock, who is in Pennsylvania too, and she's going to, this was started about Paul and Liz and the Fitzgerald family, and the amazing research that Paul has done to show that it is more than just somebody with a gun shooting our president. Okay, and so one thing, we were looking for peace. Well, you can't have peace without justice, and Alana Hartsock represents the Henry Georges folks who have taught us. I mean, they buried him so deep it wasn't funny. But Alana, if you can speak, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I wrote a few words down from what you just spoke about Kennedy's talk there at Independence Hall. The God who gave us life gave us liberty. And then he went on to praise the Constitution and the Declaration. But the God who gave us life and liberty also gave us the earth, a planet, the land and resources, without which there is no life, there is no liberty. So none of these legal documents of our democracy affirms the right as a birthright, an equal right by birthright to the planet's land and resources. Instead, we brought in these dysfunctional and unjust land and money systems from old Europe, and has created gross wealth inequality and thus power inequality, and thus the despair that we feel that we've essentially lost the republic. So I am tasked with giving some good news of a way forward of the Earth Rights Democracy movement. First, I want to say I didn't watch the news in the last day, but UK is supposed to have an election for a new prime minister because Starmer resigned. He was forced to resign. And that election's supposed to come up pretty soon now, in the next few days. And they expect it will be Andy Burnham. Andy Burnham's been a Labour Party leader for a long time, and he has for quite a few years, strongly advocates for the land value tax public finance policy of the Earth Rights Movement. So this is great, good news for us. We hope this is really going to move ahead. And then I want to screen share about something about JFK that many of you may not be aware of, even of you people who really study him quite a bit. But this is a website. Can you see it, I hope?
Yes.
Can you see this?
Yeah.
This is a Delaware River Basin Commission website. And this is history of it. Managing, protecting, and improving the basin's water resources since 1961. There's Kennedy in the picture. We're going to read about what he did to create this. What this is a commons sharing system for several states and in association with the U.S. government. It is the kind of model that can be used to share all land and resources around the world to resolve these conflicts. Like if you take the states that form this commission, it's like Jordan, Israel, Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, Middle East little states. And they could form a confederation to share the land and resources and thus bring in Earth rights democracy. That's the visionary movement for the Middle East to end those nasty wars. This is a reality. So it's a breakthrough in water resource management occurred in 1961 when President Kennedy and the governors of Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York for the first time signed concurrent compact legislation into law, creating a regional body, the Delaware River Basin Commission, with the force of law to oversee a unified approach to managing a river system without regard to political boundaries. Before its creation, some 43 state agencies, 14 interstate agencies, and federal agencies exercised a multiplicity of splintered powers and duties for the basin. This new legislation put into effect October 27, 1961. The first time since the nation's beginning that the federal government and a group of states joined together as economic partners in a river basin planning, development, and regulatory agency. Compact is federal law and law in each basin state. This is magnificently important and is totally in line with JFK's work for peace. What if we just kept conflicts going over a river basin, like we see land and resource conflicts around the world? What an elegant solution to harmonize and unify these several states over sharing and caring for a natural resource as obviously a birthright of all the residents that live in the region. So,
Amen.
Is that news to anybody?
Yes.
Good. There you have it. Thank you.
Certainly is.
Okay, you got to stop your sharing.
Yep, I'll figure it out. Or you can stop it for me. Okay.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Okay.
Paul and Liz?
Yep. Okay. Well, I'm actually going to share my story about this is actually how I discovered the hidden imperial jealousy behind the Fitzgerald legacy. And it's my personal story. When I realized that Paul's Fitzgerald bloodline was expressed in two French words, c'est moi, which means it's me, I didn't expect it to explain imperial jealousy and everything else I needed to know. I first encountered Paul in early 1970 after I accepted an invitation to attend a performance of the musical Hair. When I saw Paul on stage singing for the first time, I sensed a man who was very self-assured. After the show, I was waiting backstage for my friends when Paul walked by, and again I noticed there was a certain air about him, but I had no name for it yet. Well, the answer arrived decades after we were married when I heard Paul singing along with a song titled C'est moi from the musical Camelot he had put on after dinner one night. The JFK administration was referred to as Camelot, but I really didn't know what that meant. And as I listened to the lyrics, I began to grasp there was a reality connected to the Fitzgerald bloodline living in Paul that I had never imagined. This is a refrain from C'est moi to give you an idea. A knight of the table round should be invincible, succeed where a less fantastic man would fail, climb a wall no one else can climb, cleave a dragon in record time, swim a moat in a coat of heavy iron mail. No matter the pain, he ought to be unwincible. Impossible deeds should be his daily fare. But where in the world is there in the world a man so extraordinaire? C'est moi, I'm forced to admit, 'tis I humbly reply. That mortal who these marvels can do, c'est moi, 'tis I. After the reality check of listening to the lyrics of that song, I discovered that the meaning was based on the King of France declaring c'est moi, the Parliament in 1655, to claim authority through his royal bloodline. And it begs the question, what is royal blood? Well, the Fitzgerald family acquired the Tudor royal bloodline through the marriage of Gerald of Windsor, the first Fitzgerald, to the Welsh Princess Nest in 1097. Then they emerged in Ireland in 1169 as Norman invaders working for London. Well, over the span of 400 years, they were transformed into the enemies of London by becoming more Irish than the Irish. London claimed that the Fitzgeralds were a race of their own for marrying the Irish clans, and no matter what London threatened or bribed, the Fitzgeralds continued to fight for the Irish people. And I realized after listening to the song of C'est moi that it was the power of C'est moi that they were using, but they were using it for the people instead of themselves. And that unbreakable loyalty to the people was manifest in JFK long before he became president. As early as 1939, in a trip to Palestine, he wrote that the press were not telling the public the truth regarding the Zionist plans to take over Jerusalem. How could this young man, born to wealth and privilege, sniff out imperial lies against the people so naturally? I realized c'est moi was already in JFK's DNA. C'est moi explained to me what makes the Fitzgeralds the most hated family in British history and the most loved in Irish history. Even following the last Earl's beheading in 1583 and Ireland becoming Britain's first colony, belief in the return of the Fitzgerald spirit to free the Irish people continued to grow. And over the next 400 years, the Fitzgeralds worked their way back to emerge in the 20th century through the presidency of JFK, ready to serve all people's independence worldwide. And I want to thank you for your attention. And now we have the wonderful guest, Franklin Okanu, who is going to contribute to that discussion. And I wanted to mention that it was actually since last November when Paul presented the 400-year Fitzgerald history connecting Queen Elizabeth's master spy John Dee with planning JFK's November 22nd, 1963 death that many new connections were made. And Franklin will continue to add to that.
Thanks, Paul and Liz. Good afternoon. I take it this is where I'll start to produce just my thoughts on things, and this is how I got here to be connected with the group. And so John Dee, yep, that's actually the number one connection as to this great mystery that we find ourselves in. And thanks for the shout out for my book, because that's probably the best place to start, as I just started looking at history and just trying to make sense of the world. I begin to find that roughly a couple hundred years ago, the world took a different spin on things. And it was noticeable, but when you see in 200 years, what you're able to realize is that the plans were laid ahead of time. And then just looking to find out, well, who laid those plans, that was when I did come across the work of John Dee. Um, and it was all accidentally too, how I came across John Dee. It all came when I started to look into when just the empires really started to take hold of humanity, because that's when you see humanity start to shift. That's when you see this species that worked in unison with each other really become something other than what it was. And it's all in the rise of empires. And when you look at the empires and you look at the empires that took over the world, you really start to look at, Britain, the London, and those in that country or that nation. And it was interesting to find out that this man, John Dee, who many people either have never heard of before or somehow just think he's just advisor, have no idea to just how powerful this individual really was. And when you study how close he was to the queen, you're able to see that there's something interesting going on here. For me personally, what I really found drawing was just this was someone who back then was just known as an occultist, a chemist, someone who delved in alchemy, who delved in some of the darker works. And that's not something that's known to a lot of people or that's taken very seriously. But when you understand that a man with this much knowledge, who is this close to the queen, can have and produce a lot of ideas that can look to shape the world. And that's exactly what happened. As I began to study just where these empires came from, I found out that John Dee was the individual who coined the term the British Empire. And so, as we can see how the world changes 200 years ago, again, this is the dream of an individual almost 300 years earlier who was advisor to Queen Elizabeth I. And so my work has really come to look and see that when we look at humanity and we look at the suffering from humanity, when we look at all of the policies and just rules that have taken away the power from our divine rights to Earth, you really start to see that there is a deception that occurs. And that deception is key because again, in my study of history, one of the things that I've learned is that the revolution or the enslavement at some point stopped being physical because whenever you have a physical enslavement, the people who are enslaved eventually realize that, hey, that's the individual that's enslaving us. And so there's always a rebellion and there's always an overthrowing and evil always gets overthrown. But recently, again, in the past couple hundred years, this ruling power has realized that for them to stay more in power, there needs to be a new way of deception so that those who are enslaved have no idea that they're enslaved and they can continue just going on as needed. And that's what I really observed as I just observed how society operated. You have ideas that are taught to people just ideas that no one necessarily questions, right? People it's education for one, right? The proper term for it is indoctrination, right? This came from a Prussian school system. How do you take the mind of a child and how do you mold it to where now this individual can do whatever, right? You see how society gets educated to where it's no longer knowledge for knowledge's sake, but that mind, this brilliant mind that can think so much, gets truncated to only look in these certain things. And so what happens, you see individuals just kind of grow to the world that we are now. And so when those individuals grow, no one's really able to see the true layer of deception that occurs. No one's able to see the true chains that bind us. No one's able to see how the Imperial Empire, and I love that term, has changed over time to where it's even infiltrated ideas that were supposed to be for freedom and now are doing the very same thing that they were supposed to fight against. And so that's really where my work really dives into. It's just the deeper nature of spirituality and how if you look carefully, you can see how there's a force that looks to enslave, and that force is ever present if you know how to look for it. But then, as I say all that, one of the best things that I've also seen as well is that just as there's a force of evil, there's just as much a very powerful force of good as well. And we can go on to just how we're having this conversation here and just to the beautiful synchronicities that have occurred in our lives just over time. And so what I can confidently say is that yes, there is an empire. Yes, it is continuing to grow, but slowly and surely, as more people awake to what the reality of reality is, and you awake to what your power is, individuals are able to break free because that is our divine right here on this earth. And so I'll pause here and I'll pass it back to the group for next steps or comments.
Thank you very, very much. I've been looking at this for a long time, and there is definitely a deception, and I've found that they have the deceptors have organized themselves into secret societies, and at some point in time, you had secret societies from one organization to another, and they would fight each other, but after a while, they figured why are we fighting each other when our common enemy is the people? And so they have combined, especially when our founding fathers, they tried, they tried their darndest to make it, but they had some people that said, hey, we feel that we have the right to own people, which Lord have mercy, I find terrible. But so I really appreciated your comments, and there is a spiritual part to it, because that goodness, we can either ascribe to goodness, or we can ascribe to dominating other people and using whatever knowledge we have to make them do what we want, or things like that. And then once this quote unquote battle gets enjoined, okay, I'm talking with people at AI, and they say, well, it's much easier for the powers that be to control a divided population. Okay, so one thing that's been going on most recently, because I'll have to admit I'm a conspiracy theorist, okay, because I talk about things that I know are conspiracies, and I'm not privy to the inside knowledge, so I have to theorize about it, okay. But also, conspiracy theory is used to divide us too, to get people over here and to get people over there and have them fighting back and forth. So I really appreciate what you had to say. Paul and Liz, you have some comments?
Yeah, I want to definitely bring up, I think, a completely important piece of what this jealousy business is really all about. I'm trying to let everyone know that we have the power. They are jealous, actually, of this thing called Semwa. And every single human being has the ability to express what the Semwa is about. And that's the whole point about seeing how the Fitzgeralds, through their lived experience, took that power that they had that was equal to every other, royal blood that was, circulating at the time. And they chose to put it towards the people and into the ground of Ireland. Okay. And JFK has returned to remind us all of that. And, so I think that's part of what we're really trying to get everyone to connect to, is what this power is about. And it isn't about any kind of use of force. It is actually an ability to be so clear in your own sovereignty within yourself that you cannot be moved to do anything that you don't believe in, no matter what the bribe is, no matter what the threat is. Okay. And that's the point about, feeling that power and the connection between, I think, and that was what we love so much about Franklin bringing in the recognition of John Dee, okay, which is clearly, a very important component. But when you bring it down to that individual level of JFK up against John Dee, the mastermind from, the 16th century, basically targeting his final fulfillment of creating the greatest empire in the world, okay, that spread around the world. I mean, it's pretty obvious the creation of America was the first step in eventually creating Dallas in the way in which it was created to eventually end up on November 22nd with this temple to Isis and Osiris set up to receive the sacred sacrifice. So these are all the things that, we want people to keep in mind when we hear all these, all the challenges, okay, that we're up against, okay? And I think it's mostly the challenge is many times letting go of some sacred cows, letting go of something you absolutely believed, you thought it was true, and you discover, oops, it didn't quite happen that way. So we have others who would like to.
Bruce?
I would enjoy, hours about each contribution from everyone we've heard from so far, from what JFK said at Independence Hall, Chris, what Paul and Liz have already said, what Alana, you know, brings to light and to mind about that. But I want to ask Franklin kind of to cut to the chase. What is the nature of reality? Is this a dream that eternal souls are having? And also the major thesis of whatever major work you want to promote right here. If it's your book, An Unorthodox Truth, I'm all ears. Or if it's some other work you want to recommend, we are listening.
Hey, thank you, Bruce, for that. Yeah, and actually I'll start with, what is this grand question? Because I think that's what everything is about. Now, for me, I think we're all humans here, and so we can all realize that there's certain things that we just won't know, right? And so I think what I look to base is, listen, there's things I don't know. Like, I don't know, so I'm not even going to say what is out there. I'm just going to say what most of the data is out there. And when I say most of the data is what's most of the information that's out there from ancient traditions, humanity, all around the world, right? That is just out there. And so I think what I have seen is that when you dive into the nature of reality, the most data shows that each and every one of us, is literally a child of God. That's the cleanest way to say it, but not really like diving into Christianity. But you are a child of the chosen one. Like, the chosen one has given you freedom. My name is Franklin Okano. I am Nigerian, and there in the Nigerian spirituality, there is the concept of you're here walking on earth, right? But while you're here on earth, there's your higher self in heaven with God, right? And so your journey here on earth is you learning earth, right? But then your higher self is there with God, right? And while you're going through earth, you can make mistakes and your higher self will warn you like, hey, go here and go there. But that's just it, right? And that's very similar to Hinduism, Taoism, with all the religions kind of have this idea of, hey, honestly, this grand story of life is really just about your soul and your experience going through life, right? So that's like number one. Number two is that if that's the nature of reality, right? Well, guess what? There's some things that are going to help you on that journey, and then there's some things that are going to stand in the way of your journey. And what happens is these forces are just part of nature, right? People call them demons, people call them archons, call them evil, all this stuff. That is part of reality. You cannot get away from that. And one of the ways that I've come to see things is that this is a part of reality that in part of our journey, we are supposed to overcome these things. We are supposed to rise up and grow because as we grow, that's how our spirit grows and that's how we grow on this earth. So these challenges are here. And if we have eyes to see them, we should do something about them. And so that's something else that I see as when we solve these problems and we connect with other humans, we build communities and the spirit grows. It makes life worth living. It revitalizes ourselves, right? Just everything just becomes more positive towards this higher being in this, okay, you're now acting as the divine that you really are, right? So that's my big hey, this is what I've seen from the most part as to what reality is. And the third part of reality I do want to call out is the semwa, and I hope I'm saying that right. Is I. Again, if you are the small piece of God, right? If you do have, as Jesus says, greater is the power within you that is in of this world, right? And this world, this physicality is where Paul says, listen, be mindful of the principalities of this world. You have power within yourself, and this nature of reality is very powerful and mystical and spiritual, and we can clearly see how it's used for nefarious purposes, i.e., John Dee, i.e., people who study these works. These works are just how nature is, but again, in my book, what happened is they've made sure that the majority of people have no idea how this works. And so you just go through every single day, just think, all right, well, I guess that's how the day is. But when you understand that, okay, God has empowered me to go through this life, and two, like these problems are here for me to solve and for me to grow, and three, there's a great power here when I just look to grow that power up. Life itself begins to take on just this a daily adventure. Some call it the hero's journey, some call it the myth. Like you're growing, your spirit grows and your life grows, and then you overcome challenges like in slavery or in debt, right? And what happens is that society grows that way as well. And this has happened over time. Humanity has done it over and over again. Unfortunately, in 2026, the deception has gotten very deep, right? And we've lost a lot of, whoa, what is going on here? But I will say that's like my grand theory. And just real quick, and I'll stop. What I am working on right now is just having people just find the power in just a simple awareness. And thank you. That's a great question because I think that it's easy to get lost in the day-to-days and just the troubles of day-to-days, and you lose what I'm supposed to do here with this life. But if you can just always take a step back and just be aware as to, hey, is this for my life or not? Because one thing that we have that no other humanity has had is temptation and distraction like no other. If I can suck away your time, I'm sucking away your life. So you're just gonna pass without doing anything from your life. And so I think that's our biggest thing now is, okay, how do I spend the next 2 hours just thinking and reflecting? Because when I can do that, I can take action. And that's what they don't want you to do is don't take action. Just stay there and just exist until you go away, right? And so sorry, I hope I answered
No.
everything.
Oh my God. Listen, rapid fire questions and answers, two or three real quick before letting others speak. Where
Of
do
course.
people follow you and find you and your work?
Perfect. Substack is the number one place right now.
All right.
Unorthodoxy at Substack. Unorthodoxy.substack.com, and I can put
Th-
that in the chat.
Thank you.
Yep.
Is your book An Unorthodox Truth a Trine Day book?
No.
No,
Okay.
no, it's not. Yeah, no. I don't think I even
Uh,
knew of Trying Day at the time.
See, life just gets better and better, right? And
Perfect.
finally, you're here in
Perfect.
the States, right?
I am. I'm here in Florida,
Okay.
Tampa, Florida. Yep.
All right. So if I want to get in touch with you, Adam, or somebody could hook me up with your email or something like that.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Absolutely.
All right.
And I
Thank
put
you.
his Substack in the chat.
Nice.
Okay.
Strong. Excellent. Great to meet you. Thank you.
No problem. Thank
Thank
you guys. Appreciate it.
you, bet. Thank you, Franklin. It brings to mind my three favorite things, which is karma, okay, which you sow what you reap, okay, and then dharma, which basically means duty, Okay, there's something, there's a reason for us being here on this planet, and there's something for us to do. And then grace. Okay, the ability to realize that all men, all women, everybody makes mistakes, and that we can move forward and not just dwell on our mistakes and go forward. So, Ruth, you have your hand up.
There, I got my mic. Yes, I do. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. And thank you, Franklin. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Alana. And Bruce's questions. And I feel like some of what I wanted to bring forward has already been brought up, but I feel like there's a slightly different perspective. And one is you were talking about the jealousy of people that seem to have all the power. And, why are they doing this? And I think it's important to understand that jealousy is a symptom of fracturing, a profound fracturing from wholeness. And it's the jealousy of somebody who, because of that fracturing, does not feel whole. And when that fracturing is toxic, and with an ego that's bloated, like somebody like John Dee, who wants to conquer the world, that becomes the way of solving the problem of the fracturing, is to try to consume the rest of the world so that you can control it. And this is a very, very infantile and undeveloped way of trying to solve the problem of the fracturing, because the fracturing really happens, as you were saying, within each individual in relationship to their relationship with their creator. And you were talking about in the religion of your country, which I think about what happened to the Abrahamic religions and at the time of Rome, and the burning of the teachings of that God dwells within, in order to be able to control people. And this was, I cannot believe how much understanding the people who had power had, the Romans, for example, had at that time, of how to manipulate people's minds. They knew that the teachings that taught people that God was within would make people fearless and uncontrollable. And they understood that the best way to fracture people and control them was to create that fracture, which separates them from that knowledge of their oneness with totality, which gives them an infinite amount of power. They understood, separate them, fracture them, and keep them thinking they're just a little person. And that is, and that makes them susceptible to being afraid. And fear is the state of being that fractures you from your totality of your nervous system. It puts you into sympathetic nervous system, which makes you go to your head and into your two-dimensional thinking, which cannot create anything. In order to be a truly creative person who can enter the matrix of reality and create a reality, you have to have your whole being available, and that includes your whole nervous system. So fear is the key. And the jealousy is a symptom of that and the misuse of a way of trying to heal something that's broken. I wanted to say something that I was looking at these days, and I was looking at the surveillance state and how it's trying to stop people from even being able to think a thought, and making you a terrorist and against the state if you even think a thought. And I was thinking that is the ultimate attempt to fracture people from their true purpose for being born into a body. And that is to explore the potential of their of who they are, of their connection to this totality, their interconnectedness. the surveillance state is getting desperate. It's getting desperate to try to contain our minds so that we cannot reclaim our birthright, which is the birthright of all existence, which is total freedom, liberty, to find our way, to understand that we are one with our maker. And I also want to put in a word about what's happening in Albania. I don't know if anyone's following that, but it's really exciting. But there's a flamingo, like the bird flamingo, revolution, because Alana Trump and Jared Kushner wanted to take over the land of the Albanian people to build a billion-dollar resort, and they did all kinds of dark shenanigans to buy the land and start building on it. And this was a piece of land that belonged to the Albanian people, and it was a preserve. It was a preserve of wildlife. And they went and made a deal with the prime minister, who changed the laws, changed it, and sold them the land and started building on it. And the people they've been demonstrating for 24 days now. There are millions of people out on the streets, millions of people out on the streets, and people from Europe are coming into Albania to demonstrate with them. It is really amazing.
Amen.
And it's also the Albanian people understand that this land is their land, and it belongs to them. And they're really up against the empire, and also you begin to see, it's complicated, but I just wanted to put that into the group.
Thank you, Ruth.
Welcome.
Some comments on Ruth and other comments?
Yeah, well,
Anyone?
I have I can make a comment. Does someone else have their hand up? Oh, Mir, let's please, Mir.
I don't know how to do it.
I can go after you, Liz.
No. I've had a shot already. Please, you go.
My comment is in relation to Franklin talk. So if there's any comment in relation to Ruth, then probably can go before me. But I just wanted to, if there is no one else, then I go ahead. I just wanted to thank you, Franklin, for your talk. Really important, but also exciting in terms of your analysis, moving from physical enslavement into minds and conscious enslavement. Mm-hmm. And I think, and then you take in a way in terms of how we can tackle or challenge that is by simple awareness. I think that's the important part in terms of how we can encounter that sort of evil of enslavement, whether that is physical or mind enslavement. Then what can we do as a group, as an individuals, to tackle that, to make sure that we are not being used or enslaved, if not physically, mentally or our minds, and by simple awareness. Do you have any, or you also mentioned about mobilization of people, and how can we encounter enslavement because of whether that's physical or mental, which is a lot more sophisticated. So if you could comment on that would be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can make a quick comment. Heads up, guys, I do have to leave here in about 10 minutes or so. So I do want to make that call out there, but I can be really quickly here. So awareness is key. It's amazing. And it actually kind of going back to Ruth's point here, just to kind of show you how this grand story that we find ourselves on is a story that has been told as old as time, right? If anyone's familiar with Gnosticism or the Gnostics, right? But Gnosticism was another sect of Christianity that most people don't know of because, again, Rome doesn't want you to know that one. They want you to know this one, right? But Gnosticism kind of says that, this world is what it is. And Ruth, I was going to make a comment on your point this jealousy comes out of fear. And if anyone knows a story of just the demiurge, right, and how the demiurge is created, you kind of feel bad in a sense as to, oh, this is a kid who just his mom just created him and just left him. So of course he's going to be this ruler and think he is this god. But they're jealous of the divine spark that we all have. And that divine spark is awareness. Within Gnosticism, there's the idea of gnosis, right? Gnosis is when you know something is off, but you don't know why you know it's off, but you just know something is off, right? And that's the awareness piece that I call out, because when you first acknowledge that awareness, and in my book I call it, it's like there's awareness, intention, and then action. Like, why is this off here? And I mentioned, well, in a later story I can talk about, like, in my life, right, as I was working, like something just felt off, right? Like, what is going on? So I took some time I really want to solve, like, what is the world about? And you go through really a hero's journey, just trying to understand whatever problem that you're trying to solve, because this awareness is telling you that. And as you go through this journey, the journey itself is what's making you a better individual. It's growing your spirit, because you're learning to decipher within what's truth and what's fallacy, what's real and what's not. And the idea that ultimately I have is, when individuals do have liberty and autonomy just mentally, you are able to look at your life and say, okay, where am I being enslaved here? What is taking away my time? What do I need to become more aware of, right? And that's usually how you see that, oh, I do this because of indoctrination. I do this because I'm in debt. I do this. And then you see all the chains around you. And then individuals can start taking the time and the actions to start breaking those chains. And as a society, if we start doing that, then we really start falling off the chains that are put on us. But before we even get to society, as individuals, let's examine our lives first. As in, okay, am I happy, or what can I change, right? What needs to be moved around, right? And that's where the awareness comes, and then intention and action. I hope that helps. I have a lot more stuff like on my Substack, because it's so much information. But please, I can definitely direct anyone there, my Substack as well, to these kind of articles.
Wow. Thank you very much, Franklin. Yeah, my daddy told me some stuff I didn't understand, then looked into it, and then I've been spending years trying to figure out how the world really works. And then, one thing that we've been doing in these roundtables, and Paul and one of them came up with, he says, when Rome started the church, it was the Rome Imperial Church. That's what the name was when it started. So
We didn't hide it.
No, not at all. And that was that was a very specific thing that John Dee did when he recalculated. The calendar was completely out of date at this point. It was off. It was skewed off by the mid 1600s. And so Easter, they couldn't predict when Easter was going to be based on the alignment of their Julian calendar mathematics. So what they did was Pope Benedict went and he had his experts recalculate based on what they really understood at the time about where the planets were and when Easter should fall. And what John Dee did was, he was such a Euclidean geometrist that what he did was he went and he took their calculations and refined them even further, to the point where he discovered that they were off by days and hours and minutes. And he said to Queen Elizabeth, he proposed to Queen Elizabeth that Britain would therefore control the world if it had the exact correct clock which he had just calculated. And so what they finally did was it went all the way to the top of the government, and the government said, oh my God, no, we can't do that. We can't completely do that right now, but let's do it in secret. Let's secretly control that. So that's where a lot of the magic is coming in, because he needed an accurate projection of the future and the past and how it could be worked together in order to make his prophecies more accurate. And so there was a mathematical formula behind the so-called magic. The magic was in the mathematics. And so that during that era, mathematicians were considered to be magicians, but they were magicians in a way that John Dee really refined in a sense that, what we think of today as magic is really the mathematics of it. I mean, even the equation pi, I believe, was considered to be a state secret, because if you knew it, then you'd be able to undermine the real authority of reality. So that's where the awareness business comes in, and that's what we have been trying to do, is expand our limitation of awareness. We have all been enslaved at some level, and that enslavement really keeps us from accepting the fact that there are broader things that need to be understood about the world we live in and our place in it. And certainly we are all the children of this experience, as Franklin pointed out. We are all the children of God, and the greater organizing dynamic I like to think of. And how do we fit into that dynamic? Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Franklin, you want to make some comments before you have to go?
I can. I see Edward. I don't know if you had a question for me or not, but I can probably take it before I head out.
Oh.
I see Ruth as well. I can do a real rapid fire before I head out.
Ed? Mr. Dodson.
Hello.
Wait,
I don't
you
see
need
him
to
anymore.
unmute, Ed.
Are you?
I don't see him anymore.
Yeah.
Oh, wait,
Yeah,
there
he's
he is. There, sorry.
Yeah, he's there.
No.
Mary
Hey, Ed.
had a question too.
We don't hear you, Ed.
Yeah.
Okay, he's gone.
He has to. No, he has a.
Mary.
Mary Maxwell.
Hi, Mary.
She has a question.
Mary has a question.
You have a question, Mary?
Yeah, how do I, can you
There
hear
you
me?
go. Just
Yes.
talk.
Oh, okay. First of all, if you think that O'Connor had a lot to say just now, are you still there, Franklin? I can tell you it is not a thimbleful compared to what he does on every day or every week. He comes out with something fantastic, wonderful at Substack. So, now I see this little heart going up on the screen. I don't know how to do so. Now I have been with Chris Milligan since 2011 when he published my prosecution for treason. And right now I'm a Republican candidate for the U.S. Senate in New Hampshire. And I certainly want you to see my website. But it's called Constitution and Truth. I'm kind of a constitution maniac. And I can't really blame John Dee for wanting to get the big picture. I always want to get the biggest possible picture. Maybe I have nicer motives, but still. And now I want to tell you that at my website, and also at a documentary called thequietjourney.tv, is the real son of President Kennedy. And
No, I don't go along with that, Mary. He's not. I'm going to stop that, Mary. He's not. Okay. But
how are you going to stop it?
Just that way. Okay. Ed?
I'm sorry, my microphone was unplugged, but I plugged it in. Many of us have written books. Many of us have written a lot in our lives. And we're about to hand over the world to the young generation of adults. There was an article in Fortune magazine a little while ago that basically said that young people entering college are unable to comprehend their reading assignments.
Boy.
Professors are going nuts with trying to how to deal with this fact that young people are coming out of high school unable to read a long book and then provide, any kind of writing about what they read that makes sense. And so it's really a challenge to the traditional methods of learning. I think all of us know from our youth that a lot of what we eventually learned was hard. It wasn't easy. It required, a lot of study and restudy. And the younger generation seems to demand immediate knowledge, this dependency on artificial intelligence to write papers and all that. I would ask Franklin perhaps, and you as well, Chris, what do you think of the consequences of this phenomenon that the college professors are reporting?
I'll let Franklin talk first.
Hey, thanks, Chris. I'll take this and I'll use this as my escape here. Glad to, be here. Thanks, Paul and Liz, for inviting me. Mary, thanks for that shout out because I think we have interacted on Substack because you do read my work here, so thank you for the support there as well. Yeah, no, so one of the biggest things that I think of AI, right? And I've written about this, and I like to call it LLMs, right? Because that's literally what it is, and it demystifies it because that's really what we're dealing with here is just computing, right? It's large language models when it comes to computing. That's really all it is, right? If anyone's familiar with Excel, right, that's what you use an Excel for, right? You don't think your Excel is smart, you just think it's doing what you're supposed to do, right? However, one of the biggest things I've realized is as technology comes, right? Technology is this fire. It's that Prometheus fire. Like it can help you and it can help you on your journey, or it can destroy you. As humans, you always have this power. And then from the printing press, right? The printing press was what broke the stronghold that the Roman Church, the Roman Imperial Church had over humanity for some time, right? But then propaganda is also used with the printing press. And so what you see is that everything has this dual nature to it. It can be very, very good or very, very bad as well. Cell phones, the internet, we are now connected in multiple different states right now because of technology, and some people can use that for evil as well. So I think what we're seeing with these students again is just the future humanity just being dumbed down even more, right? These kids are being dumbed down because it's easy, right? And this is one of the biggest things that when you study history, life is never supposed to be easy, but humanity and just in general have been given comfort and convenience. Well, listen, weak times make weak men, and hard times make strong men, right? And so as you see, as these students are getting dumber, that just means they can't think for themselves. They can't hold an intellectual thought. They will just be more brainwashed and confused. However, if you do have an individual who can think and can reason and can do everything that they need to do, and then just decide to use the LMM just for whatever that needs to be done, that is a powerful individual. That is someone who's using fire appropriately. Someone that's turned that fire now into lightning. And I think that's where this whole great conversation is when it comes to LMMs because it can be so easy for you just to let it go, but you can get so dumb if you do that. And I've written a lot about this to where you start to rely on it so much, you don't do other things, right? And so I think what we're seeing is just that manifestation of it. But I'll have to go. I'm hearing my kid call me. Guys, it was a pleasure being here. Please, looking forward to next time. Wish you all the best until
Thank
we
you,
talk again.
Franklin.
Thank you, Franklin. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Franklin, very much.
Bye-bye.
And uh, Ed, we've been dumbed down, and one thing that my research into the secret societies, I mean, one thing that Anthony Sutton said, he put out 4 little pamphlets. One of them was how the, order controls war and revolution. Another one was how the order controls education. And that was one of their main jobs here in the United States, okay, was to take over education and dumb us down and bring over the Prussian education system to teach us what and how and when to think. And then when they were targeting the boomers, okay, because there was a generation in the 1860s that didn't cohere, they didn't come together, okay. Some of them joined the generation after, some of them joined the generation before, some of them just went out in the woods and did weird stuff, okay. And why did this happen? Okay, in the book Generations, A History of America's Future, they talk about, well, there was the death of a president, there was war, and then there was drugs, the opium, the soldier's disease. Okay, and and see, we move history forward. There's a idealist generation. Okay, then there's a reactive generation. Then there's one that kind of brings them back together. And then there is a civic organization to start all over to create the changes that those generations created? Well, because together, all of us together have a fail-safe device. The first fail-safe device is we know as a dialectic. Okay. Now I say some things that are true. I know that are true about drug smuggling, intelligence agencies, and secret societies. And then I find somebody that is a spook, and he says stuff a little bit. He puts some lies in there because by controlling the extremes, you can control the middle. Okay, so the next fail-safe device is this cycle of generations. Okay, and so they tried again to affect the idealistic group of the people that were teens and preteens in the 1960s. Okay, and so they had to have three things in place by 1950 to do that. One of them was television. Okay, and not just television that runs at television that runs at 60 cycles a second, that puts a flicker in there, that puts you into a trance. Okay. The other thing they needed the modern education system. Okay. Which was brought to us quite openly through a public program through the Masons. And not all Masons are bad. They get used and abused like many of us. And then they had to have a nascent drug culture. Okay. And so along came, the kids that were teens and preteens in the 1960s. Okay. And then what did we have? Well, we had the assassination of a president and war and lots of drugs. And that was so that they didn't want us to cohere, because if the idealistic group doesn't cohere, then it makes us a 4-cycle engine only running on 3 cycles, which allows the people in the shadows to come in and start to control things. Okay. So,
here we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of us have managed to escape.
Yes, and we caught the end of some of the education. Because if you look at the 8th grade education, the tests that were given in the late 1800s to 8th graders, a lot of college students couldn't pass them today. Okay, because we have been continually dumbed down and, as Franklin was talking about, deceived. And led one way or the other. And so, that's one reason why we're having these roundtables, so that we can sit around a table and talk about things and try and figure them out, rather than, sitting behind a gun and shooting the people we don't like, stuff like that,
Good alternative, Chris.
Well, just one last comment and I'll shut up. It's rather amazing to me how much is spent at the college and university level on sports versus academics.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's no professor of anything who earns as much as the coach of the football team or basketball team.
Right. Bread and secrecy. Or bread and circuses, excuse me. Okay. Ruth, you wanted to talk?
Actually, it was that comment. That was part of what I wanted to say, is like bread and circuses. I am just amazed at the energy that's going into this World Cup all over the world. And it's like everybody's in bars drinking beer, and there are genocides going on, and there's takeovers of and homelessness, and it's just amazing. And people are completely taken over, and this is part of the agenda. And the other thing I wanted to say was to Paul's comment about the change in the calendar, is that when you said that, I had an insight about why that's so important, because that's about the right alignment with the stars and with the planets and with the forces that are actually affecting us at a cosmic level, in terms of our capacity to be in alignment with the cosmic forces ourselves. And so by eschewing the dates of things, there's a confusion in the energies inside us, so that it's much harder to get those alignments with what we're supposed to do. And I didn't realize that until just now.
Yeah.
So
That-
I think
He was getting very, by the way, by 1575 or so, in that general area, time area, he was getting very accurate in terms of what he was predicting, because he was using very high level mathematical formulas that nobody else was using at the time. And he was using very, the stuff that physicists, quantum physicists would be doing today, he was doing in the 16th century.
Mhm. Well, when I think about mathematical alignments, I think about alignment, because what goes on is like all these forces are moving and they're so complex, but at certain points they all line up. And when you understand when things are lining up, you have an understanding of this is the time to act. This is when the powers are behind me. So yes,
Yeah, well, I know I wanted to comment on what you're saying because I think it's critically important. We've been trying to make the point about the mystical power and how much the average person has completely been disconnected in many ways. And many of the largest religions are doing their job in making sure that the average person has no access to the actual power within these institutions at all. And this is all part of what we have been talking about when we're talking about recognizing your own mystical power and being conscious of it. And what you said about the alignment of the stars, boy, what a simple way to throw everybody off. Screw up the calendar. Nobody can figure out anything. The only ones who can use, and that, by the way, is the way magic is run. It's actually alignment with the universe and the actual exchanges, the plasma energy, I think is what they would call it today. That your ability to draw that energy to you, okay, and have it work on your behalf. That's what John Dee was doing with the, the Enochian
right.
language.
The thing is that I didn't understand this until just today.
Okay.
The power that was and I really understand it now. And the other thing I had to do to Chris's things about television, that the word tell a vision, the power of the narrative. And when you control the narrative, that's the lens with which the creative force of the mind structures how it creates reality. So the telling a vision of television is actually, taking over that lens. And the other thing had to do with just how much the church understood the power of the alignment of the stars was what happened to Galileo. He tried to, correct it, and there was a lock on the information because they understood to put the sun in the center was to put it was a quantum intelligence of the centers everywhere. And they wanted the center to be the church. So.
Well, Ruth, a lot of the things that were being done, a lot of the people that were working on those kind of mathematical formulas were working on encryption as well. So a lot of the ancient manuscripts or older manuscripts that Dee was drawing from had been calculated in the monasteries. And those books were available at the time because, of course, Henry VIII had dissolved the monasteries. So all that thinking was just, he was very upset, actually, from what I've read, that they had destroyed the monasteries because for him, that was the source of his conceptual understanding of the way the universe worked, actually. And that by figuring that out, you could figure out anything that happened in the past or the future. And that's what made him so successful. He finally ignored it all, and he got the protection. Finally, he was persecuted at one point early on. He was tortured actually early on in his career because he considered what he was doing was magic. It was sorcery, and if you were accused of sorcery, you were in a lot of trouble. And if the Pope got his hands on you, you became a whiff of smoke. So that was it was the going outside the box in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance was you were taking very, very serious dangers upon yourself, and you could really wind up on this, at the stake.
It's happening now because they're using terrorism. If you say something about Israel, you're a terrorist. If you say something about AI centers, you're a terrorist, and you're going to be put in jail, and that jail is going to be horrific. Right. So this is going on now. The narrowing of what they're allowing us to think.
Well, that's where the enslavement comes back in.
Right. Well, it does bring one to recognize that the actual ending of slavery by the British Empire clearly wasn't because they weren't preparing for another form of enslavement. It's pretty obviously economic slavery is actually what we got for a replacement from real slavery. Maybe the step taken, did produce results, and it did change and create other opportunities. But the idea that the British were so noble, I think that's where the mistake is, to think they did it for any noble reason.
I'm sure Chris is very well aware of this because of his father, that his father made him aware of the fact that the most powerful form of propaganda is the one that you think you thought yourself. So if you are convinced that you thought up this particular way of looking at this situation and that nobody else influenced you, then, that's the belief. And that was the belief system that was put into documents like PSB/33-2 back in 1953, which was done by the Psychological Strategy Board in order to convince Americans that they were coming to the conclusions that the Psychological Strategy Board wanted them to come to.
Well, it also includes the concept of free trade. When the British Empire applied free trade, it was basically to destroy every colony's ability to become independent with their own production. And so but again, their use of the word free trade clearly, their use of psychology obviously was pretty amazing.
God. I think.
Well, Leo Chern back in the 1950s described Notre Dame as a one-man democracy. So, that's one of the most amazing things about, the use of language and just abracadabra. The government we're installing in Vietnam is a democracy, and it's ruled by one man, and that's it. So,
Mary, did you want to talk? I unmuted you.
Yes, on June 30th. The group that RFK used to host called Children's Health Defense. They are putting out movies in theaters. You can buy a ticket. It's $21 only on that night. And it's called Duty to Disobey. So, Chris, when you mentioned the drugs and the Vietnam, I think that's what this movie is about. Duty to Disobey. And it's a one-time showing in many theaters around the country. I found one locally here.
I think the concept is basically, this is about, military people who are told to do something that basically is a war crime. And we know certainly when it's coming to the obvious crisis of the genocide issue, we know that, that it's certainly not American military, but the idea that you have to draw the line. And we know that when you're a part, this is a big part of a lot of the problem for many people. When you are a part of the system and you believe that you went into the system believing certain things about that system, and when you're in it, you discover it doesn't function that way. And there's lots of things going on that you didn't know about. And you end up realizing that you're participating in things that you actually don't believe are the right things to be participating in. And you can't just suddenly get out of it. There are serious, and a lot of people are coming up against that crisis all over the world in different ways. We know that. So the idea of, international law, which has clearly been horrifically trampled in the last, obviously the Gaza genocide in particular, this is.
I made my living selling money to people to buy residential property. That's how I made my living.
Mm-hmm.
So I turned millions of households into land speculators. and And it's just the way our market system functions without Henry George's solution.
Right.
And people, the average person doesn't think of themselves as a land speculator.
Exactly.
There's an expectation that if you buy a residential property today, if you live in it 10 or 20 years, it's going to increase in value considerably. No one thinks of their housing unit as a depreciating asset.
Mm-hmm. Right.
We all think of our automobile as a depreciating asset. I say to students, all right, you buy that BMW and you drive it off the lot and you drive it around the block twice to test it out. And you say, oh, I don't like the way these seats feel, or I don't like the color. I'm going to take it back to the dealer. You drive it back to the dealer. You've driven it 3 miles, and the dealer says, okay, you want to give it back to us? Okay. Well, that was 80,000, but now it's only worth 75,000.
Yeah. Exactly.
And all the assets that we produce with our labor are depreciating assets.
Right.
But somehow, with regard to a residential property, we expect that there will be an increase. And we don't attribute it to the land market. We just don't understand that there's this distinction. And so it makes it really difficult for those of us who are trying to get legislation passed to get people to understand that this is an unjust arrangement. Because for something like 3 out of 4 households, the net worth they have in their residential property is their net worth.
Right.
They have very little additional savings or pension funds. And so you're saying, geez, you didn't earn this, but gee, it's all I have. You take that away from me, what do I have?
Right.
So we need transitional measures to lessen the harm that would be done on people who, basically have little but that net worth to rely on to pay for their retirement years, or leave as assets to their children.
Right.
Difficult, really difficult.
Right.
But that's what reading books will help, Chris, right? If people will only read and get a diverse selection of reading, they'll learn to think deeply about these things and not superficially.
Well, you also have to face the fact, Ed, that there was an absolute directed campaign to totally destroy Henry George's information.
Oh, sure.
Totally destroy how popular it was, and how obviously if he had ever become the mayor of New York, he would have had New York City to showcase how powerful it is. And know full well the probability that somebody got rid of him. That's my belief.
He might have been assassinated.
Yes. That's what I'm thinking.
He might have been assassinated.
Yes.
Well, it's an old tradition.
Yeah.
I'll give you an anecdote that you might find humorous. When I first came in contact with the Henry George community, this is 1980, and I took classes at the Henry George School for a year, and I finally got it that this guy, Henry George, has something to offer us. Up to then, Milton Friedman was my economic guru. So I started to think more deeply about it, and then I attended a Henry George conference in New York. People all over the world came. There were like 400 people there, and I later wrote a story, because when I got to that conference, Alana and I and a handful of others, we were the only people there without gray hair.
Wow.
They called us the Young Turks. There was, just a small number of us. So I wrote this amusing article. I got a photograph of a 19th century office and this man in a 20th century business suit walking through the door and looking at all this antiquated equipment, an old manual typewriter or whatever, and everybody dressed up in 19th century garb. And I wrote as the punchline, hello, I'm looking for the Henry George movement.
Okay, we're at about our 90-minute limit here. You have any last comments, Paul and Liz?
Oh, did you want to give anyone a chance to say any last words?
Yeah.
No, I know. I think Ruth.
No.
Yeah,
you know?
just quickly, because what you're talking about is the disequilibrium of the system that we're in, so that when people do have a little something to hold on to, they can't let it go because the system is so desperately unsupportive. And so in order for people to be able to make that shift to the generosity of the Henry George way of seeing things, there has to be a systemic change that would support them. It has
Here
to.
we are. We're trying, Ruth.
Yes,
We're trying.
I just want to put that into what you're saying, because without that, it's impossible.
Mary, you have a final thought?
Yes, I'm in court right now. It's called Maxwell v. Trump, and it's a war crimes case for the Iranian situation. It's in the federal level of appeals in Boston right now.
Okay. Well, who would have thought, when I was a kid, who would have thought that we got to watch genocide live on TV?
Yeah.
Okay. To show how much, things have changed, Israel tried to do something like that with Mr. Reagan in power, and he just stopped the weapons right then. Okay. But, the days we're living in today, and I used to, as a kid think, well, gee, how did the Germans get taken, by that Hitler guy and do all that stuff? Well, I don't think
We know
that,
how. Yeah.
that today, because you can, we're experiencing it here, and but I still have hope, and I think there's still people standing up. Now, I generally like to end these again with some words from Mr. Kennedy, and this is from Amherst College, October 26, 1963, less than a month before he was murdered. I look forward to a great future for America, a future in which our country will match its military strength with our moral restraint, its wealth with our wisdom, its power with our purpose. I look forward to an America which will not be afraid of grace and beauty, which will protect the beauty of our natural environment, which will preserve the great old American houses and squares and parks of our national past, and which will build handsome and balanced cities for our future. I look forward to an America which will reward achievement in the arts as we reward achievement in business or statecraft. I look forward to America which will steadily raise the standards of artistic accomplishment and which will steadily enlarge cultural opportunities for all of our citizens. And I look forward to an America which commands respect throughout the world, not only for its strength, but for its civilization as well. And I look forward to a world which will be safe, not only for democracy and diversity, but also for personal distinction. Robert Frost was often skeptical about projects for human improvement, yet I do not think he would disdain this hope. As he wrote during the uncertain days of the Second War, "Take human nature altogether since time began, and it must be a little more in favor of man. Save a fraction of 1% at the very least, our hold on this planet wouldn't have so increased." Because Mr. Frost's life and work, because of the life and work of this college, our hold on this planet has increased. Onward to a better future for our children.